The year is 1 AD. While empires rise and fall across the Atlantic, Rome stretching its marble arms over Europe, a different world breathes quietly across the American heartland. Here the Ohio River curls through misty valleys, ancient forests tower over endless plains, and the air hums with the rhythm of unseen civilizations. No stone monuments mark this land, no written scrolls tell its story. But beneath the soil, America's first architects are already shaping the earth. They are the Adena, a people whose name will be whispered thousands of years later, not from their words, but from the mounds they left behind. These were not just piles of dirt, they were symbols of life, death, and cosmic order. Each mound carried meaning, a burial ground, a gathering site, a bridge between the living and the spirits that moved through the wind. Across the valleys of what is now Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia, smoke from Adena villages rises like morning prayers. Families craft tools from stone and bone, carve patterns into pipes, and weave baskets strong enough to carry both food and stories. The men hunt deer through frozen forests. The women tend squash and sunflowers that sprout from soil dark as memory. Together, they live in rhythm with the rivers, the same rivers that will one day cradle America's cities. And yet, in this silence, something stirs, something that will outlast them all. Beneath their feet, the earth remembers, even when the people are gone. As centuries pass, those mounds will grow taller, their meanings deeper. What began as sacred burials will evolve into monumental centers of community, astronomy, and faith. The Adena are planting not just crops, but the blueprint of North America's first civilization. The Romans built with stone, the Chinese carved with bronze, but in America the Adena built with earth itself. Each grain of soil pressed into a mound was a prayer, a promise, and, unknowingly, the foundation of the mound builder world that would echo across the next 2 millennia. The Adena lived in harmony with forces they could not see, but always felt. Their world was a living spirit. The rivers spoke, the forests breathed, and the stars whispered secrets. To them, everything was connected. Life, death, soil, and sky formed one great circle. When a hunter fell, he did not vanish. He simply returned to the earth that once fed him. This belief shaped how they built, how they farmed, and how they dreamed. Their homes were round and low, made of saplings bent into domes and covered with bark. Each one was a mirror of the heavens, circular, eternal, without corners or endings. They understood geometry not through books, but through the rhythm of life. The round house, the round mound, the round earth above. Their leaders were not kings but keepers of memory, spiritual guides who carried stories older than any monument. They gathered people in large earthen circles, where fires burned in the night and drums echoed against the hills. These were not just meetings, they were ceremonies of connection, binding families, ancestors, and the unseen world. And when someone passed away, their journey did not end. The Adena believed that death was a doorway, not a disappearance, so they buried their loved ones in mounds layered with care, soil upon soil, gift upon gift. Pipes, beads, carved effigies, and tools, each item carried meaning, guiding the spirit toward its next world. The mound itself became a sacred map of existence, a bridge between worlds. Every mound was a message, written not in words but in earth. Archaeologists today still uncover these messages, a polished stone axe here, a ceremonial pipe there. Each discovery whispers of a civilization that saw beauty in simplicity, meaning in soil, and eternity in every grain of dirt they moved. The Adena left no temples, no gold, no armies, but they left something far more powerful, proof that civilization doesn't begin with conquest. It begins with connection. They taught that greatness isn't always carved in marble. Sometimes it's molded quietly from mud, patience, and reverence for life itself. By the 1st century AD, the Adena were no longer just families scattered along the rivers. They had become builders of meaning. From the rolling plains of Ohio to the valleys of Kentucky, their hands reshaped the land itself. What began as small burial mounds now grew into monumental earthworks, circular, conical, and geometric forms that reached for the heavens. To outsiders, they might have looked like simple hills, But to the Adena, they were sacred architecture, temples of soil. Each structure began with a ritual. The community gathered, sometimes hundreds of people strong. The elders marked the center with a stake, the heart of the mound. Then, bucket by bucket, the earth was carried from nearby pits, placed layer by layer with rhythm and precision. They built not in haste, but in harmony, the movement of the people matching the heartbeat of the land. The Adena didn't measure with rulers or draw with ink. Their precision came from observation, the sun's path, the moon's rise, the river's bend. Over time, their mounds aligned with celestial patterns, marking solstices, eclipses, and seasons. They turned the ground into a calendar of the cosmos. It was hard work. The mounds took months, sometimes years, to complete. Yet there was no complaint. Each handful of soil was sacred, each step a prayer. The process united families, villages, and generations. Children grew up beside the mounds their parents built, and someday those same children would rest beneath them. They weren't just building monuments, they were building time itself. As their creations multiplied, the Adena's influence spread. Neighboring groups began to imitate their style, their tools, their rituals. A cultural fire was spreading across the eastern woodlands, the dawn of the mound builder tradition. Soon others would rise, the Hopewell, the Mississippians, each carrying the torch first lit by the Adena. In these ancient builders, America's story was already taking shape. A story of vision, unity, and respect for the earth, long before the word America ever existed. Their mounds were not ruins of the past. They were blueprints for the civilizations to come. Each mound the Adena built was more than soil and stone. It was a story in layers. Every inch told of life, loss, and belief. To walk among them was to walk through time itself. Some were round and tall like the rising sun, others stretched in lines or ovals, tracing invisible patterns in the land. To the Adena, the earth was alive, and these shapes were its heartbeat. When the community gathered to raise a new mound, the moment was holy. Drums echoed through the valley. Smoke spiraled toward the clouds. The people moved together as carrying baskets of dirt, singing as they worked. Each song a memory, each step a promise that the living would honor the dead. The construction was not just physical, it was spiritual engineering, connecting the world of the people with the world of the ancestors. Some mounds held single burials, a revered leader or a shaman wrapped in bark, surrounded by offerings. Others contained many souls, layered through time, families resting side by side. As generations passed, more earth was added, expanding the mound like a living organism. The Adena believed the spirits within continued to watch over the living, guiding crops, weather, and destiny. The mound was not a grave. It was a gateway, a place where earth met eternity. Archaeologists have uncovered clues, beautifully carved pipes in the shape of birds and animals, polished stone tools, beads made from copper, and shells carried from faraway coasts. Each item spoke of trade, skill, and belief. These objects weren't decorations, they were conversations with the beyond. They didn't bury their dead, they planted them into eternity. To this day, the Adena mounds rise from the ground like gentle waves frozen in time. They are found across the Ohio Valley, in Chillicothe, Moundsville, Portsmouth, silent but unbroken. Thousands of years later, they still command the landscape, untouched by centuries of storms and wars. And though the people who built them are gone, their fingerprints remain in every curve of earth. Each mound is proof that long before the founding of a nation, the soul of America was already learning to build, not from conquest, but from reverence. To the Adena, existence was not a straight line. It was a circle, endless and sacred. The rising sun, the phases of the moon, the change of seasons, all told the same story. What ends always begins again. Their lives moved to this rhythm. They planted when the rivers thawed, hunted when the leaves turned gold, and gathered in winter to share stories around the fire. Each year was a journey, and each journey led back home. Their ceremonies reflected this eternal loop. Fires burned in great circles. Villages were built around central gathering places. Even the burial mounds mirrored the shape of the sky, perfectly round, as if echoing the heavens above. They believed life flowed from the earth to the sky and back again, an infinite dialogue between worlds. Each object passed from one hand to another carried meaning, a story, a blessing, a lesson from the land. The Adena saw themselves as guardians, not rulers. The earth was not theirs to own but to honor. Every animal they hunted was thanked. Every tree cut down was mourned. Their spirituality wasn't built in temples. It was built in the wind, the rain, and the soil. To live was to give back. They didn't just survive on the land, they spoke its language. In a world where other civilizations chased power and empire, the Adena built something quieter, balance. Their mounds, their rituals, their art, all reflected a cosmic peace that few cultures would ever achieve again. They lived not for domination, but for continuity, ensuring that the cycle of life could turn forever. And through that circle, they planted more than crops. They planted an idea that the land itself was sacred, and those who walked upon it were its caretakers, not its kings. As the Adena culture flourished, their world began to grow more complex. Villages turned into centers, and sacred sites drew people from miles around. Each gathering brought together hunters, traders, and shamans beneath the open sky. There were no crowns, no thrones, yet a quiet power existed, shaped by faith and wisdom rather than fear. Their leaders were chosen not by force but by connection, those who could speak to the spirit of the earth, who understood the rhythm of the seasons and the will of the ancestors. Power was not taken, it was entrusted. And with it came great responsibility, to maintain harmony between people, land, and the unseen. The Adena believed that spiritual balance sustained life. When floods struck, it wasn't punishment. It was a reminder that the natural world demanded respect. When crops failed, ceremonies followed, filled with smoke, song, and offerings. Their faith wasn't distant, it was living, breathing, and interwoven with daily existence. And as they looked to the stars, they noticed patterns, constellations that mirrored their mounds, celestial paths that guided their planting and their prayers. To them, the universe wasn't somewhere out there. It was reflected right beneath their feet. To the Adena, heaven wasn't above. It was all around them. The Adena's faith shaped their art too. Carved effigies of birds symbolized the soul's flight. Serpents represented rebirth. Circles embodied eternity. These symbols weren't random. They were a language of belief, a visual scripture etched into the land. As generations passed, the Adena world reached its height. Their sacred mounds dotted the horizon like constellations fallen to earth. They had achieved what few cultures of their time could, a civilization rooted not in power, but in purpose. But all cycles, even sacred ones, must turn. And as the centuries rolled on, change began to stir on the wind. Time, like the rivers of the Adena homeland, never stands still. By the first centuries after Christ, the world around them began to shift. Climate, trade, and neighboring cultures started weaving new patterns across the land. What had once been small networks of mound builders expanded. New groups emerged, each adding their own voice to the great song of ancient America. And though the Adena still built and believed, their way of life began to change. But as their world evolved, so too did their challenges. Populations grew, resources thinned. The once open forests began to change under the weight of human need. The Adena, who had long lived in harmony with the earth, now faced the reality that even balance can be fragile. The rivers that had once carried life now carried silt. The fields that had always given freely demanded more. And yet, they didn't vanish in despair. They adapted, merged, and transformed. Cultures don't disappear. They echo in new voices, new hands, new hearts. By the dawn of the 3rd century, the Adena culture slowly began to fade into the broader Hopewell tradition, not as a collapse, but as a transformation. Their ideas lived on, the sacred circles, the alignment with stars, the reverence for soil and spirit. What the Adena began, others would expand, until the mound-building tradition stretched across half a continent. Their story reminds us that change is not death, it is inheritance. Every culture is both the ending of one story and the beginning of another. And though their name would someday be forgotten by the world, their fingerprints remained, pressed deep into the earth that still remembers them. Centuries passed, Forests grew, rivers shifted, generations rose and fell, but the mounds remained, silent, enduring, watching. The Adena were gone, yet their creations refused to vanish. Grass covered them, trees rooted upon them, and the wind whispered through their curves. The earth had reclaimed what it once gave, but beneath every blade of grass the past still breathed. When the first European settlers arrived thousands of years later, they saw these mounds and wondered who could have built them. Some imagined lost tribes, others guessed ancient giants or forgotten empires. They didn't know that the truth lay right beneath their boots, that long before colonists, long before even the word America, a civilization had already written its story in soil. Even today, the Adena legacy continues to inspire. Historians study their patterns, artists draw from their symbols, tribes across the continent see in them echoes of their own ancestors, proof that the spirit of creation in this land is ancient and unbroken. Every mound that rises from the valley floor is a silent teacher. It reminds us that greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers from the ground beneath our feet. The Adena may have vanished from sight, but their presence is eternal. Because when a people build with purpose, with reverence and with love for the land itself becomes their monument. 2,000 years later, the story of the Adena still rises from the earth, quiet, unbroken, and waiting to be remembered. Their mounds stand as America's oldest monuments, older than any church, fort, or capital. And while the world often celebrates empires built on conquest, the Adena remind us that the first builders of this land built not to rule, but to belong. Their message was never written on stone walls or golden tablets. It was written in the soil itself, a promise that humanity and nature are one. They believed that if people cared for the earth would care for them. And though centuries of storms, wars, and progress have passed, that truth still holds power. In every seed planted, every river protected, every hill preserved, their spirit lives on. They were the first to teach that civilization does not begin with wealth, but with respect. Not with weapons, but with wisdom. The Adena never vanished. They became the land itself. Today, historians call them the Adena, but to the earth, they are simply its children, the ones who listened. Their mounds remind us that before America became a nation, it was already a home, ancient, sacred, alive. The next time you stand on American soil, remember this. Beneath your feet lies not just dirt, but the memory of builders who dreamed in harmony with the stars. They may have lived 2,000 years ago, but their vision still shapes the horizon. Because in the end, the Adena taught us something eternal, that the greatest civilizations are not those that conquer the earth, but those that learn to live as part of it.